Emily Carter stood at the center of the sunlit reception hall, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she paced slowly, making mental notes. The venue, Lakeside Haven, was everything she had ever dreamed of. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the lake, where swans lazily floated by and a gentle breeze stirred the tall grass. The floral arrangements were scheduled to arrive at noon the next day. The seating chart had been finalized last night, after a late call with the wedding planner. Everything was in motion, humming toward the most important day of her life. She clutched a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, eyes flicking between her checklist and a text from the caterer confirming the final delivery window. It had taken months of planning. Years, really, because since Emily was 16, her parents had promised her that when the time came, they had a special fund put aside just for her wedding. It was their gesture of love, they always said. Her father, Mark, a structural engineer, had told her how he started saving for her when she was a baby. Not everyone gets to plan without worrying about money. He'd said proudly during her engagement dinner. You just focus on making it the day you want. She had. And now, just one day away from marrying David, a man who steadied her when life got messy, who listened without judgment, who knew her fears and dreams better than anyone. Everything was finally falling into place. After her final stop at the venue, Emily decided to swing by her parents' house. It wasn't on the list, but she had a few extra printed itineraries and a small box of custom name tags she'd accidentally left there last week. The house sat just a few miles from her apartment, nestled in a quiet suburb where she and her brother Jake had grown up. As she parked in the driveway, she noticed both of her parents' cars were there. Unusual for mid-afternoon on a Friday, but she didn't think much of it. She let herself in using the old key still attached to her keychain. The house smelled like lemon polish and coffee, warm and familiar. As she stepped inside, she heard voices coming from the kitchen, low, urgent. She paused, not wanting to startle them. She hesitated in the hallway, listening for a natural break in the conversation before announcing herself. But what she heard stopped her cold. "We didn't have a choice, Linda," her father said, his voice tight with frustration. "Jake was going to die. He OD'd in a parking lot. Do you really think we could have just stood by?" "I know," her mother replied, quieter. "But tomorrow is her wedding, Mark. We should have told her weeks ago." "And say what?" "Sorry, sweetheart. We blew your wedding fund on your brother's rehab. She'd never forgive us. Maybe after the honeymoon. Maybe once things calm down. She'll find out eventually. The photographer still needs payment. And the caterer's been calling me for days." Emily felt her body go numb. Her heart pounded in her ears as if her own pulse was trying to drown out their words. For a moment, she wondered if she'd misheard, but the meaning was crystal clear. They spent the money, her wedding fund, on Jake. She stepped back, her hand trembling as it brushed against the doorframe. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Her parents had always helped Jake through every crisis. The arrests, the detox stints, the relapses. He'd been sober once, just long enough to lull them into hope, before disappearing again and sending them spiraling back into sleepless nights and frantic phone calls. And now, just one day before her wedding, she found out they had taken the money meant for her future to pay for his treatment again. She didn't even realize she'd walked out of the house until she was back in her car, the door slamming shut behind her. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, blinking back the hot pressure behind her eyes. It felt surreal, like the floor had shifted beneath her feet and she was floating somewhere between disbelief and fury. She didn't call them, didn't text. She just drove, not toward home and not toward David's place. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed air. She needed silence. She ended up parked at the overlook where the hilltop gave a sweeping view of the valley below. She and David had watched fireworks there once on the 4th of July, wrapped in a blanket, eating cold sandwiches and laughing about their failed attempt to make pasta salad. The memory hit her like a gut punch. She stared out at the distant rooftops, the quiet hum of traffic blending into the wind. A single thought kept repeating in her mind. They didn't even tell me. They had let her plan every detail, make every deposit, commit to every vendor, all while knowing that the fund she believed existed no longer did. She had trusted them. She had believed them when they said, "This day is yours." Her phone buzzed. It was David. "Hey, everything okay? You've been gone a while." She hesitated, then typed, "Can we talk later? I just need a moment." Three dots appeared, then stopped. Then came the reply, "Of course. I'm here when you're ready." She turned off the phone screen and laid it face down on the passenger seat. For a long time, she didn't move. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape. Eventually, her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Her mind wandered back to the moments over the past few months when things had felt off. Her mom hesitating when she asked if she could upgrade the chairs. Her dad brushing aside questions about the final payment to the band. She had chalked it up to stress or forgetfulness. But now it all fit together. They had been stalling, hoping they could cover the gaps without telling her. Hoping, perhaps, that she wouldn't notice or would understand. And maybe she would have understood if they just told her. If they had come to her and said, "Jake relapsed, and we had to help him, but we want to work together to figure this out." But they didn't. They hid it, and that cut deeper than the money. She finally started the engine and drove home. The streetlights had flickered on by the time she parked outside her apartment. The glow of the city cast a muted warmth on the sidewalk. She took a breath, gathered the box of name tags from the passenger seat, and walked inside. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mom. "Hi, sweetheart. Call me when you can. We need to talk." Emily didn't reply. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water, sat down at her kitchen table, and stared at the delicate embossed name tags she had so carefully designed, each one a tiny symbol of a day that now felt stolen. And in that still moment, surrounded by silence and disappointment, she knew that tomorrow would no longer be about the fairy tale she imagined. It would be something else entirely. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same question echoing over and over in her mind. Why didn't they tell me? It wasn't just the money, though that in itself was a blow. It was the way it had been hidden from her, the way they let her believe everything was fine, encourage her to dream, to build something beautiful, while they knew it was a lie. Her heart felt heavy with a bitterness she didn't want to carry, but couldn't push aside. She loved her brother. She loved her parents. But this wasn't just a mistake. It felt like betrayal. The first rays of morning crept through the blinds, casting long, golden stripes across the carpet. She heard the faint rumble of a delivery truck passing by, and sat up slowly. Her head throbbed with the dull ache of unshed tears and unrest thoughts. The dress, the flowers, the cake, all were still happening today. The rehearsal dinner was at 5 p.m. Everything was set in motion, except her. At 7:48 a.m., her phone rang. It was her mother. Again. Emily let it ring out, then watched as a text followed seconds later. "Please come over. We need to talk before tonight. I'm so sorry." She stared at the screen for a full minute before finally typing a response. "I'll come. Not now." Then, as if on autopilot, she got dressed and drove to David's apartment. He opened the door in sweats, hair still tousled from sleep, concern etched into every line of his face. "Hey, what's going on?" She didn't answer right away. She walked in, dropped her bag on the couch, and stood facing the window, arms crossed. "They used the wedding fund," she said finally, her voice flat. "My parents. They spent it on Jake's rehab." David blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, what?" She turned to him. "They didn't tell me. I found out yesterday. Accidentally. I overheard them talking." David's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He crossed the room and sat down on the couch, motioning for her to join him. "Come here." She sat, her body stiff. "They said he overdosed again. A few months ago. It was serious. I guess they had to check him into one of those expensive private facilities. 28 grand. Gone." David leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Jesus. I mean, I get why they help him. But to not even tell you? And the day before your wedding?" Emily gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I thought maybe we'd grown out of this phase, where everything's about Jake and his latest disaster. But no, it's the same as always. He messes up, and we all have to pay for it." David didn't rush to speak. He knew her too well. He'd heard the stories, missed holidays, Jake's late-night calls, the time her parents had to remortgage the house when he crashed a car while high. He had never judged Jake, but he had always seen what it did to Emily. "Do we need to call off the wedding?" he asked gently. "We can figure it out. I don't care where we get married. I just want you." Her eyes welled with tears, but she shook her head. "No, I still want to marry you. I don't know if I can pretend everything's okay tonight." The rehearsal dinner? All our families together, smiling like nothing's wrong? David placed a hand on hers. "Then we don't pretend. We're honest. Or we leave early. Or we skip it all together." Emily wiped her eyes. "We'll go. But first, I need to talk to them. I need to say this out loud. To their faces." She left David's place an hour later and drove to her parents' house with a tightness in her chest that made it hard to breathe. When she pulled in the driveway, she saw Jake's old car out front, a beat-up Honda that had somehow survived years of his reckless driving. She hesitated at the door before ringing the bell. It opened almost immediately. Her mother looked pale and drawn, like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were red. "Emily, come in." She stepped inside without speaking. Her father was sitting at the dining room table, nursing a cold cup of coffee. Jake was there too, slouched in the corner chair, looking uncomfortable, like he wanted to disappear. Emily walked in and set her bag down slowly. "You lied to me," she said quietly, looking at both of her parents. "You knew I was planning this wedding for months. You knew what that money meant, and you just watched me." Her father opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. "No, I don't want to hear another excuse. You could have told me. You could have sat me down like an adult and explained the situation. I might have been hurt, yes, but I wouldn't have felt like a fool. You let me go on thinking we were fine, all while making deposits on things you knew I couldn't pay for alone." Her mother's voice broke. "Emily, we were terrified. Jake was dying. We didn't know what else to do. And yes, we should have told you. We just kept hoping we could fix it in time, that we'd get some money back, or maybe we'd cover it with credit. You hoped it would just go away." Emily interrupted. "You hoped I'd never know." She turned to Jake, who had been silent. He finally looked up. "I didn't ask them to do that." "No," she said sharply. "But you've been asking for years, Jake. Every time, every crisis. And we all drop everything to catch you. I'm done being the collateral damage." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm not angry that you got help. I'm angry that once again, you became the priority. Not just in a time of need, but in the middle of my life." There was a long silence. Her father stood up, his expression heavy with guilt. "Emily, you have every right to be angry. We made a mistake. We failed you. Not just this time, but many times." Her mother reached for her hand, but Emily gently pulled away. "I still love you both. I do. But tomorrow I'm getting married. And after that, I'm setting some boundaries. You don't get to keep doing this. I'm not going to put my life on hold anymore because Jake messed up again. I'm starting something new with David, and I'm doing it without lies, without guilt." Her voice wavered, but her resolve didn't. She picked up her bag. "I'll see you at the rehearsal dinner. But please don't expect me to smile through this like nothing happened." She walked out before anyone could respond. Back at her apartment, she sat at the kitchen table again, staring at her wedding schedule. David called a few minutes later and said he'd handle the photographer. His family agreed to cover the catering gap. His aunt offered to help rearrange the venue details if needed. Emily hated needing help, but something about the way David simply did things without asking made her feel like she wasn't falling apart. Like it would all still happen, just not the way she thought. Later that evening, at the rehearsal dinner, she stood next to David under a string of fairy lights in her friend's backyard, an improvised venue after the original planner refused to proceed without final payment. It wasn't what she imagined, but it was quiet, intimate, honest. She made a short toast, thanking those who showed up with love, not pretense. She didn't speak of money. She didn't shame her family. She didn't mention Jake. But everyone who needed to know knew. And when she sat down next to David again, he squeezed her hand gently. "I've got you," he whispered. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to believe it. Emily woke early on the morning of her wedding, not because of nerves or excitement, but because her mind simply wouldn't rest. The events of the last 24 hours clung to her like a second skin. She sat upright in bed, the early sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor of her apartment, and stared blankly at the bouquet of dried eucalyptus and white roses resting on her desk. Originally meant as inspiration for the centerpieces that would now never come to life as planned. She wanted to feel joy. She wanted to be present in the moment that she'd spent years dreaming about. But there was a heaviness in her chest that refused to lift. It wasn't about the dress or the flowers or the venue. It was about the shift in her family. Something quiet and painful that had been building for years and had finally broken through the surface in a way that couldn't be patched over with apologies. Her phone buzzed again, messages from friends and well-wishers, little hearts and emojis and countdowns. She stared at them for a second before turning the screen face down. By mid-morning, the temporary hair and makeup team, a pair of David's cousin's friends from school, arrived at her apartment. They were bubbly and enthusiastic, carrying foldable mirrors and cases full of brushes and palettes. Emily offered coffee, though her own remained untouched on the counter, now cold. As they worked on her, curling her hair and blending subtle shades of gold across her eyelids, Emily watched her reflection without much attachment. The woman in the mirror looked like a bride, yes, but she didn't feel like one. Not yet. Her dress hung neatly on the doorframe, pressed the night before and still protected by a plastic cover. It wasn't the couture gown from the bridal boutique she'd picked out originally. That one was still at the shop, unpaid. The new one had come from a local vintage store, a lace piece with delicate cap sleeves and a slight ivory hue, something timeless and understated. It wasn't what she'd imagined, but in the last 24 hours, she had let go of a lot of imagined. When her bridesmaid Amanda arrived, she brought bagels and a small bottle of champagne, wrapped in tissue paper with a card that simply said, "To new beginnings, not the ones we expect, but the ones we need." They didn't talk about the money. They didn't talk about Jake. Amanda had been Emily's best friend since college, and she knew when silence was the kindest kind of support. Instead, she helped zip the dress, adjusted the neckline gently, and said, "You look like yourself. That's the best kind of beautiful." By early afternoon, Emily found herself in the park, a quiet section near a small grove of birch trees that David's uncle had reserved with a simple permit. His family had helped set up folding chairs, a white aisle runner, and a modest flower arch, made of local blooms picked up from a nearby market just hours earlier. It wasn't the grand estate. There were no gold-rimmed place settings or 12-piece ensembles. But there was something peaceful about the simplicity, something grounding. David stood near the front, adjusting his tie and talking to the officiant, who was a retired judge and friend of David's family. When he turned and saw her approach, his face softened into a wide, quiet smile that made her heart ache with love. The guests gathered in soft chatter. Her parents were there, seated in the second row. Her mother wore a pale blue dress and clutched a small handkerchief. Her father's hands were clasped tightly together in his lap. They looked humbled, uncertain. Jake sat 2 seats away, shoulders hunched and eyes fixed downward. Emily glanced at them, then turned her gaze forward. As the soft notes of a cello played from a speaker on a small Bluetooth setup, she walked slowly down the aisle. Her dress rustled gently in the breeze. She passed faces she knew, others she only recognized from holidays and events. Everyone stood. She focused on David. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and in that moment, the noise fell away. The ceremony was brief but full. The officiant spoke not just of love, but of resilience, of the kind of commitment that doesn't just endure joy, but also weathers disappointment and pain. Emily's throat tightened more than once. David's vows were simple but steady. "You're my home," he said. "Wherever we are, whatever we face, you're the place I come back to." When it was her turn, she hesitated briefly, then looked into his eyes. "I thought this would look different," she began. "But life rarely gives us what we imagine. Instead, it gives us what we're ready for, even if we don't know it yet. I'm ready for you, for us, for something honest and real." There were tears, some theirs, some from the guests. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the kiss felt like the first solid moment of the entire week. It grounded her, pulled her out of the chaos and back into something she could hold on to. The reception that followed took place just a few feet away, under a rented white canopy strung with lights. There was no coordinated dance floor, no fancy seating chart. Guests grabbed folding chairs and found whatever space they liked. David's cousin played a guitar, while someone passed around homemade cookies. The caterer, a family friend who ran a small bistro, set up a table with warm trays of roasted chicken, vegetables, and garlic rolls. It was imperfect, it was unpolished, and it was full of love. Later, during a lull between conversations and toasts, Emily stepped away to catch her breath. She found herself near the edge of the trees, looking out across the park where children were playing in the distance. The sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling her dress with gold. Her mother approached quietly. "Emily," she said gently, "can I say something?" Emily nodded, arms crossed loosely. "I know we failed you," her mother said. "There's no easy way to explain what we did. We thought we were saving your brother, and maybe we were, but we never should have done it at the cost of your trust." Emily looked down at her feet. "You didn't just take money. You took my right to choose. You made that decision without even telling me." "I know," her mother said, her voice breaking, "and I'm so sorry." They stood in silence for a while. Then Emily looked at her. "I need space after this," she said softly. "Not because I hate you. I don't. But because I've lived my life in the shadow of Jake's struggles. And I can't do that anymore. Not if I want this marriage to be healthy. Not if I want a future where I'm not constantly the one who bends." Her mother wiped her eyes and nodded. "We'll give you that space. I promise." Emily didn't offer forgiveness in that moment, but she offered honesty. And for now, it was enough. As she returned to the reception, David reached out and pulled her into a slow dance. The music was faint, the laughter soft around them. He whispered in her ear, "So, this wasn't quite what we expected." She smiled against his shoulder. "No, but might be exactly what we needed." In that moment, under the twinkle of borrowed lights and the hum of a handmade celebration, Emily didn't think about what had been taken from her. She thought only of what she still had and what she was building. Not a perfect beginning, but a real one. And that, she realized, was enough. 3 weeks after the wedding, the thank you card still sat untouched on Emily and David's kitchen counter. A stack of ivory envelopes, blank and silently accusing, waiting for the kind of closure she hadn't yet found. Life had returned to a kind of rhythm, though it wasn't quite the one Emily expected to fall into after marriage. She thought she'd be basking in newlywed joy, perhaps looking at honeymoon destinations or assembling photo albums. Instead, she was untangling a different web, one not of celebration, but of boundaries, damage, and repair. The morning sun filtered through the window of their small apartment, casting warm light across the breakfast table. David sat across from her, quietly eating toast and scrolling through his phone. Emily stirred her tea absently, her mind far from the table. "You've been quiet," David said, finally setting his phone down. "I've been thinking," she replied, "about Jake, about my parents, about everything, really." He nodded. "Want to talk about it?" Emily set the spoon aside and sighed. "I thought the hardest part was finding out. Then it was standing up to them. Then getting through the wedding. But now, I think the hardest part is figuring out how to move forward. I don't want to keep living in that loop where Jake falls apart and everyone else gets pulled in. I don't want my own marriage to start like that." David reached out, took her hand. "Then don't. You already took the first step. You stood up for yourself. That's not easy." Emily smiled faintly. "It's not enough. I don't want to stand up once and then fall back into old patterns. I need to make real change. That means saying no, even when it feels selfish." They didn't talk more about it that morning, but the conversation lingered in Emily's thoughts all day. She received a text from her mother in the afternoon. "Would love to drop off something for you and David. Just a little gift. Let me know when." Emily stared at the message. Her instinct was to say yes, out of politeness. But politeness was part of the old pattern. Instead, she replied, "Thanks. We're not ready for visits yet. I'll let you know when we are." The response was short, neutral, honest. Her mother didn't reply. Not that day. That weekend, Emily received a call from Jake. She hesitated when she saw his name flash across the screen. She hadn't spoken to him since the wedding, and part of her didn't want to now. But she answered. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from." She didn't answer immediately. I wanted to say thank you for not blowing up the wedding, for still inviting me, for not kicking me out. Emily leaned back on the couch, the phone pressed to her ear. You didn't make that easy. I know. I didn't make any of this easy. I've been a tornado for years. I get it. But rehab this time, it was different. Maybe because I almost died. Maybe because I saw what it did to you. She exhaled slowly. Jake, I'm glad you're trying. But I can't be your backup plan anymore. I can't keep getting hurt every time you spiral. I don't want you to, he said quietly. I don't want to be that person anymore. She waited, listening to the background noise, his uneven breathing, the creak of what sounded like a chair, the faint echo of some distant street noise. I'm not calling to ask for anything, he said. I just wanted you to know I'm clean. I've been clean for 72 days. I'm working. I'm staying in a sober living house. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not screwing everything up. Good, she said after a pause. That's good. I'm sorry I messed up your day. I know I didn't crash the wedding or anything, but still, I know what they did to help me hurt you, and I wish I could undo it. Emily closed her eyes. You can't undo it, but maybe you can stop repeating it. She didn't promise to call back. She didn't promise anything. But when the call ended, she felt a strange sense of peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time, Jake hadn't made it about himself. He hadn't cried or begged. He had owned it, and that was something. The following week, Emily and David invited his parents over for dinner. It was the first small gathering they'd hosted as a married couple. As David's mother helped chop vegetables in the kitchen, she mentioned how much she admired the way Emily had handled everything. I know it's not my place, she said gently, but watching you stand your ground at the rehearsal dinner, it made me think about how often women are told to smile and keep the peace. But you didn't. You chose truth. That was brave. Emily smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It didn't feel brave. It just felt necessary. After the guests left, Emily sat on the couch, staring at the stack of thank you cards again. This time, she picked up a pen. She didn't start with the usual names. Not the friends, not the vendors. She picked up a blank card and wrote, Mom and Dad, thank you for raising me to believe in commitment. Thank you for showing me what unconditional love looks like, even when it's messy. I know you acted from fear, not malice. But I also need you to understand that love without respect isn't enough. I'm building something different now. Something rooted in honesty and boundaries. I hope one day you can be part of that again. But for now, I need space to grow into the woman you always said I could be. I hope you'll understand. Love, Emily. She sealed the envelope and set it aside. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was clear. And that, she realized, was the most powerful thing she'd written in a long time. In the following weeks, she and David continued to build their life slowly. They didn't rush into a honeymoon. Instead, they took long walks, cooked together, planted herbs on their balcony. They laughed. They fought once or twice over dishes or grocery lists. But every time they disagreed, it was different, gentler, more deliberate. They were learning each other in a new light. As husband and wife, as partners, Emily's relationship with her parents remained strained. There were no Sunday dinners, no calls just to check in, but there was space. And in that space, Emily found herself again, not as a daughter constantly managing chaos, not as a sister weighed down by guilt, but as a woman who had finally learned the difference between love and obligation. One evening in early spring, months after the wedding, she stood on the same overlook where she had fled to the day she found out. This time, David stood beside her, his arm wrapped around her waist, a thermos of coffee in his hand. The city stretched below, quiet and glowing. You ever think about that day? He asked. All the time, she said, not with anger, just with clarity. That day broke something open in me, and I'm glad it did. I was holding on to a version of my family that didn't exist anymore. He nodded. I think it's brave that you chose yourself. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I didn't do it alone. They stood there in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Emily didn't have the wedding she'd imagined, but she had something better. She had truth. She had love that didn't ask her to disappear to earn it. She had a partner who didn't flinch when things got hard. And most importantly, she had herself, whole, clear-eyed, and finally free. And that, she knew now, was the beginning she had always deserved.